Russians would attack them too, shocking the wounded Norwegian forces, who wouldn't be able to do anything. With both Germany and Russia splitting the entire Scandinavia, Balkans would be the next region who would act. Serbia would use this situation and attack Kosovo. With both of them sending their entire armies to the border, things wouldn't look good for Kosovo. Serbian forces would act fast, easily demolishing them and taking their entire territory. However, this would start a huge brawl, as both Bosnia and Croatia would declare war on Serbia, while Montenegro would join on the Serbian side. Their forces would be somewhat similar, but since Serbians would be better prepared, they would be able to crush Bosnia, which would lead to Croatia falling back, and eventually falling as well. Albania would shock the Serbians, attacking them and pushing them far back. With North Macedonia joining them, Serbs would be absolutely devastated, as they would all fall, letting Albania take all of the conquered territories. However, Albanians would betray Macedonians, attacking them from behind and beating them. Hungary would begin their fight next, as they would attack Slovakia, crushing them in a record amount of time, which would cause the Romania to step in and attack Hungary. With Moldova joining them, a huge war would begin against the biggest rivals on the Balkan. However, since Hungary would be tired from their battle from Slovakia, Romanians would be able to crush their forces quickly, beating their century-long rivals. Turkey would start next, who would want to take control over the Balkans once again. It would go really well, since Bulgarians would have a much smaller army, but would be able to defend due to small territory between them. However, with the constant pressure from Turkish forces, they would be able to break their defense, absolutely demolishing all of them. Greeks wouldn't like this, as their biggest rival would be expanding. They would also send all of their forces to the border, preparing for another clash of the Titans. Meanwhile, Albanians would make a crucial mistake and would attack Romania. Even though they would be able to deal a starting blow and push the Romanians back, things wouldn't look good. Romanians would spread their forces, and since Albanian forces wouldn't be able to react, Romanians would tear through their territories, taking many of the occupied land. Albanian morale would be destroyed, and while they would flee, Romanians would destroy their forces, eventually taking their own country and beating them. While Romanians would be winning, Turkey would send an offensive direct towards Greece, which would push the Greek army way back. Greeks would try to regroup, but would lose many soldiers while fleeing. This would be a decisive blow for them, as the Turkish army would push deeper, eventually forcing the last remaining Greek soldiers to fight back, but they would also be defeated. Romania would be watching this war from afar, and would ready their forces, preparing to strike. Since Turkish forces would be all the way in Greece, Romanians would use this situation to split their forces in two. With one of their soldiers' groups holding the Turkish army trapped in Greece, the other would charge into their territory, taking it easily, causing the entire country to fall, giving Romanians the entire Balkans just for themselves. With this major victory from the Romanians, nearly all European countries would be involved in this battle. Italy wouldn't like that they didn't expand, and would finally be ready to attack. They would see that nobody in the Balkans took Slovenia, and they would use this situation to attack them. With their army much stronger than the Slovenians, they would crush them easily. Switzerland would be the next one, and they too wouldn't have a huge army to defend. However, they would play with what they've got, and would be able to hold them back for some time, but it wouldn't last forever, and they would fall. Spain would be the next one to act, as they would attack Portugal, starting another huge rivalry in the European continent. Since Portugal would have significantly smaller army, they would know that their only option is to knock them out in a quick series of attacks. They would plan to attack the northern Spain, specifically the Basque country, trying to encircle them after. With their army ready, they would shock the Spanish with their intensity, taking half of the Basque pretty quickly. However, there would just be too many Spanish forces, and with the Portuguese attacks slowing down, they would know they are doomed. Spain would form an counter-invasion, pushing them out of their territory quicker than they conquered it. With Portuguese army in minimal numbers now, they would stand no chance, and would get obliterated by the Spanish. With every country participating in at least one battle, only 6 countries would be left. Russia would be tired of waiting, and would send their soldiers to the border, trying to attack Romania. However, even though Romanians would be strong, they would be no match for the Russians and would have to think of a way to beat them. They would move their forces from Moldova, letting Russians take it without any problems. But that would exactly be their ace in the sleeve, as many Romanian forces would stay there, attacking them from behind and taking a decent chunk of their soldiers. Romania would think they are able to win, but something shocking would happen. Russia would have so many soldiers that this would sting them just a bit and would just cause them to send more soldiers. Romanians would be devastated, as the enemy would push through their territory, crushing their soldiers one by one. With no way to counter this invasion, the remaining soldiers would flee from battle, letting Russia finally beat them and take the entire Balkans from themselves. With seeing Russia's rapid rise, Germans would see that Russians are closing in on them and would be forced to do something. They would decide to attack Spain, since German forces had enough time to rest, while the Spanish forces just got out of a huge war. Spain would know that their soldiers are nothing compared to the Germans, and would have to think of a genius plan to beat them. However, it would already be too late, since Germany would pull out a quick blitzkrieg attack on them, running through their defensive lines. Spanish troops would try to regroup, but the attacks would just be too intensive, and would end up with all of Spain's forces getting demolished. Without anyone protecting the land, Germans would take their entire territory, shocking everyone with their power. With the downfall of Spain, only 4 countries would remain in this battle. Italians would know that they don't have much time, and would have to strike Germans back before they can do anything. Germany wouldn't have many soldiers available to send, and would have to deal with what they have. Italians would have to go into offensive, but wouldn't be able to push the German army back. Since Italians didn't take many territories before this fight, time wouldn't work in their favor. With many days passing, Germans would be able to recover, getting their huge army to the border. Italians would be absolutely shocked with their intensity and would fall back and regroup at Rome, where they would try to strike back. Since many German forces wouldn't be able to advance, Italians would be able to stop their advances and eventually even push them back. However, Germans would just wear out their forces, who would be forced to fall back again. This time, they wouldn't be able to regroup in the south, as their enemy would be faster, being able to destroy their forces and their entire territory as well. With this victory for the Germans, their new territory would grow to being absolutely massive. However, this would be the perfect time for UK to strike, who would ready their forces and send them to French territory. They would expect a great army waiting for them, but would be shocked when nobody would be defending the French territory. UK soldiers wouldn't care and would just continue moving forward, but things would soon change. Even though they would be able to take France into their custody, German soldiers would finally show up. However, they would surround the UK, who had just fallen into their trap. Their entire army would be encircled, and with the German soldiers closing in on them, things wouldn't look good. UK soldiers would try to break out of their trap, but it wouldn't be effective, leading to their downfall. With only a small army of soldiers remaining in UK, they would stand no chance against the German invasion, who would be able to completely crush them, taking control of their territory. With the United Kingdom falling into German hands, they just cemented their status as a great European power. However, they wouldn't have time to celebrate, since their biggest challenge is yet to come. Russians would control the entire Eastern Europe, and since they had time to prepare, they would have a significantly bigger army. Since Germans had just survived a horrifying series of battles, their soldiers would be tired, but would have to defend their motherland. And with that, the final battle would begin. Russian forces would show their intensity as they would rampage through German land, pushing their soldiers way back. Germans would try to stand their ground and defend their native country, but to no avail. The enemy's attacks would be so fierce that Germans would be forced to fall back, letting them take the entire Germany. However, their morale wouldn't be destroyed, and instead, they would be more motivated than ever, wanting to get revenge. German forces would have a good position to create a defensive line, not letting a single Russian pass. The enemy would try, but wouldn't be able to break through. With every day passing, Germans would just be getting stronger until they would reach the perfect time to strike. Germans would start a ferocious attack, which would really catch the Russians off guard, making them fall back and regroup. However, German forces wouldn't give them the chance to reorganize their army, and would attack them even faster, taking out many of their soldiers and completely pushing the enemy out of their territory. It would look like nobody can stop them, as they would continue their long march, crushing whatever is in front of them. Russian forces would have no other choice than to fall back, allowing Germans to come pretty close to their capital. The enemy would use this situation to send their soldiers to the Scandinavia, who wouldn't be defended, and would be easily taken over by the Germans, allowing them to come even closer. Russians would try to do the same thing the Germans did, but it wouldn't go so smoothly. Germans would constantly put up high pressure, and even though Russians would be able to recruit more people, their defense would fall apart. This would be a huge shock, as the Germans would rampage through their territory and closing in on Moscow. Russians would just pump up new soldiers, but that wouldn't be enough, as Germans would take over Moscow and crush nearly the entire Russian army. The remainder would try to flee and regroup somewhere, but it would be too late, as German forces would catch up to them and finally defeat them. With this victory, Germans would take over the entire Russia. After years and years of fighting, the real winner of this challenge would appear, and it would against all odds be the Germans, who would finally reach their century-long dream of controlling the entire European continent.